Heyo everybody, what's up? Tom here, back at you with another video. And today is League launch. I've had a little bit of stuff that I had to do today, but I'm finishing Act 3 before I go to bed. I'm still on Act 1. I would like to be done with the acts by tomorrow. And warrior, correct? But I thought I might also put a video up.
We just saw that. Hold on. We just saw that. We just saw the same.
Got some good Peace Go content. He debated Rob Noor.
I don't think that either of those are the most likely scenarios, so I reject both.
Okay, go for
I
it.
think that they disliked Charlie Kirk, right, and went to find things that they thought were negative that he said. Then they stumbled upon that quote and just heard it and weren't critical of it, so they reported it, only to be informed later and probably threatened with a lawsuit that, no, you dumbasses, he did say that, but he was angry about it, and he was arguing against the quote that he was reading. That's what I think happened. They intentionally went searching for inflammatory things, he said, to justify their... I don't think so.
Well, I think my intuition of that probably changes. Like, if they are specific, because what you're saying doesn't sound implausible to me that someone could do that someone could be searching for bad things with Kirk. And I guess my intuition about whether that was like a good thing or bad thing to do might depend on like whether it was an op-ed or whether it's like a reporting part of it. But here's the thing, like, to me, okay, assuming that was the motivation, liberal newspaper is liberal. More at 11? Like, what is the whole fucking... What is your point about
Well,
this?
it's not. The point is that basically the implication that we heard from prominent Democrats is they may have said the right thing. First off, they saw the mass amounts of Democrats that were celebrating this. So in the same time that that was occurring, they basically were making the argument, well, yeah, but he was a really horrible person, so we understand.
Well, I think that part of Charlie Kirk's image has always been as a firebrand. And as someone who is... Okay, so part of reporting what Charlie Kirk meant to America and how Republicans saw him and how Democrats saw him surely like involves trying to assess why people are either upset with him or why people support him. In fact, in order to even explain, right, like why there could be people, and there were, in fact, and I condemn it, celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, you would, like, even just to have context, a good reporter would need to explain why people were upset at him. So I just, the context in which that comes up, I think really matters to me, and whether or not we have evidence that it was done maliciously. We can keep going down this line, but I'm curious, like, all right.
I disagree. By the way, I'll just say this real quick. Like, according to a recent poll, I have to see where it came from, but according to this recent poll, a plurality of Democrats say that the person most responsible for the assassination of Charlie Kirk was Charlie Kirk and his own beliefs. They had that as higher than the beliefs and thoughts of the shooter.
The problem I have with a lot of these polls,
I forgot I have
Rob, is there's a couple senses in which people can use the term responsible, right? Like, if we mean is culpable, and that I think is not an unfair interpretation, Rob, what you're saying as culpable.
Oh, that mark is good.
You caused this, you did this. Sometimes to reference, like, you are culpable for what you did. In other words, you did a moral ought not, right? But there are other people who say, like, who mean it in a different sense. Like, he's responsible if he, as like a but-for thing, if he weren't saying these things, he wouldn't have been killed. Now, both things, I agree with it in one sense and not in another. I disagree, right, that he was culpable for his own death. I think that's preposterous, absurd, and I think that the person who's responsible, and this will get into what you think ought to be done, using the death of Charlie Kirk, which you complained about, the person who was responsible for his death is, in fact, the shooter, Tyler Robinson. And maybe there's some negligence somewhere else, or if you could prove one of these theories, Candace Owens, etc., that, like, I don't know, Egypt or Israel or the combination of France and all these people did it, then you can see culpability there. Whoever was helping them, if there's actually evidence. If you were to ask me, but for Charlie Kirk's views, would he have been killed? I think that, like, that's our whole argument, that it's a political assassination. That the causal relationship...
But there's two problems with that.
Yeah.
There's two problems with that. One, you could say you could take that ad reducto anywhere and say, but for the birth of Charlie Kirk, would he have been assassinated? So it's like, yeah, I guess you could always blame anyone who's killed because they wouldn't have been killed if they don't exist. That seems to be a bad standard.
I think
and
the problem,
the problem is, even if I accept what you're saying here, the problem is it doesn't say, do you think Charlie Kirk is partly responsible for his own death, right? That's not the question. It is who is most responsible. And one of the options given is quite literally the mental health and views of the perpetrator. And so people saw these two options and said, the views of the killer or Charlie Kirk himself, even under your loose interpretation of responsible, they still said Charlie Kirk was most responsible.
But Rob, I want to be clear. It is quite possible that this poll elides whatever issue I'm talking about or whatever. But like, I will just often see like the polling done on like violence. The way they phrase it can sometimes be ambiguous. And I'm not saying that I would interpret responsibility that way. I'm just saying that some people might. Some people might interpret responsible. Yeah, if you hadn't done this, I'll give you another example, right? Like, some people have said things like, fuck around and find out. If you go to a bad part of town, if you move to the city, I don't want to hear
Your boy Destiny.
Exactly, right? So people who have said this have, what they mean by, like, fuck around and find out, you know, you do this and whatever happens to you, there's a sense of responsibility that even, I think, intuitively appeals to Republicans at times. I'll give you, again, the context of back into the cities. I've heard Republicans say, I don't want to hear about your complaints regarding violence. If you get mugged or whatever, don't come crying to me. You chose to live in this city after you knew Democrat policies, whatever. And that could be the sense in which some people answer that. But to put all of that
That's a different level, because it would be the equivalent of saying, well, if you wear, it's the equivalent of, well, you wore a short dress and you work down the street.
That's what I mean.
There are people, okay, but you wouldn't say that no one in their right mind would say that she's most responsible, even more responsible than the sexual assault.
I agree. I think it would, all I'm giving you is a general complaint that I would need to see how it's asked. Maybe this polling is done in a good way. I'm not sure. I'm not a fucking statistician. But I just will sometimes see, even also by the, another example of this is the recent strikes on Venezuela, drug boats, where you see how the polling is done, and it's like, do you think that we should destroy drug boats in the middle of the ocean? Well, like, and their answer is like, yes, we should do that. But oftentimes that's like not the important moral issue. The important moral issue is, should we in fact like kill people in these strikes when they're being targeted? So,
which group or persons would you say is most responsible for each event? The fatal shooting of conservative activist Charlie Kirk in Utah on September 10th, 2025. Corporate media, there's a small percentage that say that. This is limited to Democrats with certain degrees, but it's the same without the degrees if you look at it with the Democrats. Political opponents, 15%. Their own political views and rhetoric, 40% when it comes to Charlie Kirk. And then the mental health and views of each perpetrator, 32%. Unsure, no opinion, 10%.
This is this is exactly the problem, Rob. Like, this kind of question is kind of, it seems to imply some kind of causality in term of it, not a culpability in term of what is most responsible.
Oh, no.
Okay, I mean, maybe.
I totally, I could go to the restroom. I'll be right back.
Okay, go for it.
And then we can go where you want with it. But
yeah, no.
Till next time.
Hey, folks, what up, everybody? Thank you
found my
watching Epic Conversation, Battle of the Titans.
Together.
Goodbye.
Hi, I'm Avarice.
Good to meet you.
I got a mute problem.
I actually know who you are
So
because
if we are to
I'm a Rob fan. I will occasionally watch the stream you guys do. When there's a whip, there's a way. With all your little things and the nation stuff, and so I know you.
Fantastic. Well, sometimes I'm Avarice, and then sometimes I'm Jess Gerald, like EOD said.
Awesome.
You see, yeah.
Might make
Justice
good
Gerald.
No, it's an ongoing thing. I stole the jacket from Jess Gerald
You're like in
at
the
the
producer
BayCon.
chair. That's pretty cool.
I'm in the producer chair in the back. Yeah.
That's awesome. Are you you and Rob are Crucible? Jason, you guys are collabing on Word War Debate, maybe, or you're helping Rob out, or what's going on?
No, I just help Rob out. I mean, I'm a fan of the Crucible, and I frequent the Foundry, and I'm like pretty active there. But I'm not like, I don't represent the Crucible in any way.
You just have a baby. Someone just said.
I did. Yes, I did.
Congratulations, man.
So,
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I just help out here, and you know, Rob, being a good friend, was nice enough to give me the back chair, and I just get to play the patsy.
So you pounce in, then swipe, then Infernal Cry, then slam, or you pounce in,
Shockwave Totem.
Shockwave Totem. Let's look at my equipped gems first. All right. Kind of tough to say. Go for Infernal Cry. Oh, I can actually do both. Although, where are they going to fit onto my bar? Okay, I think these will all fit, actually. Eee. Oh, wait, not where I wanted to go. I still have wolves, by the way.
See the whip songs.
There you
There was
go.
one about Rob Knorr. I know that he likes sticking. He works with like Black Elk, his editor, and
Great guy.
Andrew Wilson, and so no, that's great, and I'm so
No,
you know,
wrong place. Oh my
it's great
god.
that you
No,
guys-
I'm super blessed. I'm super blessed to get to know Rob. He's a great person, and I will let you guys get back to your fun little
Discussion.
debacle. Yeah, your fun discussion. But I am always in the back. But remember, chat, get those donos in. We've been going at it forever.
You know, and
All right, so
listen,
where'd you-
yeah, where I want to go with it, but I do appreciate you. I know this is like so folks. Bob has been live now 13 hours, 12 hours.
15 and a half.
Jesus
Or
fuck.
15-20, yeah.
But
So
is he
I have
streaming
some
PoE or something?
disadvantage in terms of like, because I woke up.
It's not
fresh.
showing. It don't bother me. It's
No,
all right.
I'm not. That wasn't a little neg. So, regardless of how Democrats view, let me give you what you want. I think that there's, even you can see with Luigi Mangione, there's a lot of like flirtation kind of stuff. Even among people I know, like I was having I'm not gonna name names, with some lawyers that I knew, who were kind of like Luigi pilled. I'm like, fuck, that's like a little. That's a
Yeah,
little
it's becoming,
spicy.
it's beginning very, and like there's a lot of polling that suggests this. Like there were polling that suggests more than 50% of Democrats said that it would at least be somewhat justifiable to murder Donald Trump or Elon Musk. Slightly different numbers regarding the two of them, right? So it's definitely becoming more prolific. Now, I think that legally, absolutely, we shouldn't stymie people's speech to call Trump or Kirk or anyone else a fascist. I think that any legal threshold of that would be absurd. But I think that morally, what we see
Even though
is...
Elon says it, and fucking Trump is saying shit that they
Oh no,
shouldn't bar.
I agree. Other people say it. What I'm saying is the difference that we see right now with the left is there's very few sort of condemnations of the violent scale that's occurring on almost on a nightly basis. Yes, it's absolutely true. Up and to the point of you yourself, where it seems that your very lack of interest in the actual insurrections that are occurring on a weekly
But I
basis for the
condemn-
Democrats, and you have very little interest in it.
I condemn the violence, and so does Gavin Newsom.
You're
and
saying
so
it,
does-
but you're sort of laughing here because we know what's going on. Sure, I know I'm supposed to say that I condemn it. I'm not
laughing
even saying you.
because I'm laughing because I'm exasperated that we're going back to the insurrection point.
The point is, we don't have to go back to it. The point that I'm trying to say is it's clear that Democrats are like, oh, yeah, I guess violence is bad. But anyways, they are insurrection. Anyways,
You
there
say
are
it's
criminals.
clear.
Anyways, they are Gestapo.
You say it's clear, just like you can read you can kind of see what their feelings are, and the way they say it kind of signals wink, wink, not Nazi, right?
Well, it's not even just the way they said. It's the lack of interest in it, like your lack of interest in the insurrections.
I covered extensively litigation on the National Guard deployments, specifically in California, and I read the trial opinion on Bussy Comitatus and the allegations by the government on what was going on there, and so it's in the context in which I was, steeping myself in these facts. I've done more so than like any other left-wing streamer, and I'm covering like the legal arguments. Now the facts are being filtered oftentimes through that context, and but it's not usually my want to just put videos of the violence going on, if that's your point. But I have addressed them, and I have talked about it. I'm not shying away from it at all. And Democrats, and this you can't deny, at least the politicians, they have almost to a man condemned the violent stuff whenever it's prominent and it comes up.
No, in fact, quite the opposite. As they see this violence, what they're doing is suggesting things like, we need to get the masks off these people. And they're saying things like, we know that this could be, and it's no joke though, because we know that people are following these agents home and attacking them. That we know that.
That's hang on.
Yes.
You can have a principled position that this kind of lack of identification of a federal officer. By the way, I saw your debate with tomfoolery. Very. I did not agree with him, to say the least. Necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I can say about you that I respect is I don't think that you've ever said any. There are certain things that people say that really like get under my craw. There was a time I debated this guy Vegan Gaines too. When people start suggesting that they would take the law into their own hands, I think that you have to be very careful about suggesting.
Oh sure, yeah.
And so like when I talked to Vegan Gates, he was like, you know, he happens to be a black gentleman. He's like, you know, oh, if you're black and the police pull you over, don't listen, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, don't fucking say that, man. That's really bad. That could literally lead to someone being harmed. That's a bad idea. Tom, in his instance, saying like, if I see, you know, people detaining someone that looks like law enforcement, I'm going to demand to see their credentials, and if not, I'm going to start using violence against them. That's bad. That's fucking a bad idea.
But you listen, I tend to agree that like these kind of sovereign citizen type arguments I sometimes hear, that like, yes, cops can effectuate an arrest illegally. That doesn't give you justification to use deadly force in those instances.
Correct.
Even so, I was having this conversation with Avi about the strikes. We got into the weeds about the potential justifications for use of force there, because the definition of murder is killing of a human being, causing the death of another with malice aforethought in an unjustified manner, and unjustified there is with reference to law. It's not redundant. There could be authorizations such as self-defense that will make something that would otherwise be a murder, an intentional killing. There's no other like qualifying exception or anything. Be not murder, right? And so, self-defense context, it could be the case that we're not in an active, hostile, non-international state conflict with these gangs. It could be the case that America is committing a war crime or some kind of like illegal stop of these drug ships for whatever reason. And notwithstanding the fact that their initial confrontations were illegal, if the drug boats started firing upon American personnel, they would be well within their rights under U.S. law to fire back, notwithstanding all the illegality coming up to it. So my prior in terms of like what's good recommendation for people, I think in general, the advice, and there's always the exception that proves the rule, but in general, that you should submit to displays of authority so as not to get yourself fucking killed. That's totally in line with what the Democrats are saying about making officers identify themselves, right? What you just said there.
It's not just a principled stance to say that they identify themselves, because the problem is this is occurring in the context of these officers being attacked over and over again. And the Democrats are repeatedly saying a bunch of stuff that they know will jeopardize them. It's not just a principled stance of take your mask off. It's also things like we've seen Democratic politicians actually, at least one of them, break into an ICE facility and trespass and then shove and by legal definition commit assault against ICE agents. Of course, indefinitely put on hold that trial, even though we see the video evidence in front of us. Muted. I believe you muted yourself.
Oh, shit. That better?
Yeah.
How about the sandwich thrower?
Yeah. Clear assault.
So I actually think under the legal definition of assault, at least the little case. So this is an opinion with 51%. I'll put it a little higher. I'll say 6. I think they meet the legal threshold for assault under the jurisdiction there, because it really just is like an offensive touching. It's kind of incorporating the common law there, and I don't see what the legal argument is for why that would definitionally not fit under assault. Whether or not they ought to have charged it as a matter of discretion, I would not have charged it. Juries can sometimes, if they think it's all bullshit and stupid, and one of the problems was like internally the cops were all like laughing about it. Not exactly the best evidence when you're trying to claim this is a serious felony assault is to have people. Now I don't say that that's legal for purposes of the analysis. But I just say that I think it was a stupid decision to charge in that case. And one of many.
Well, I don't think so, because the reason that they charge is because the mass amounts of violence that we see occurring to these agents all over the place. So they're trying to set a precedent like, look, we have to protect these people. If it was a one-off incident, of course, you can make that claim. But we see routinely that these ICE agents are being attacked with vehicles, having things thrown at their vehicles, being physically assaulted on foot. We see these occurring over and over again. We actually had an incident in Chicago where they were being rammed and boxed in, and they called, and law enforcement whistleblowers from Chicago PD said that they were specifically instructed not to respond to the call. So there's evidence that these ICE agents are under massive attack, and the attacks on them are going up far more than they have been, at least during the Biden administration. And at the same time, the Democrats' big narrative is like, yeah, we don't like those attacks, but you can't send the National Guard to protect them. We want these people unmasked. And we actually see some Democratic politicians that are saying, like, these are Gestapo-type people. It's possibly illegal what they're doing. We just want to remind you, if you obey illegal orders, it didn't work with Nuremberg, etc. It's clear that the full-throated push is that,
criticize
look,
Trump's policies on that.
It's
And-
not Trump's
but
policies.
But
it's
all of
also
that fall
talking
well
about,
short of encouraging violence.
Well, I think that I'm not saying that it meets the legal definition.
I'm not saying
that
legally. It's not
clear.
even encouragement of violence.
Oh, it's not just that it's encouraging. It's intentionally setting the dominoes up that someone will act upon it in a poor manner.
You're going to have to make that case. I mean,
Of course.
it's not even to the Democrats' political advantage to do that. I heard this, by the way, like of the shooter, right? Like even assuming that person might have been motivated by the statements of Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin. He's this like, I don't know, resistance lib-pilled Afghan national who's like waiting to get the signal from.
Might be a little bit too much to stretch between int, dex, and strength. Well, let's start with Herald of Blood, and we'll try that whole thing first. Right, it doesn't work with a staff. It's going to be hard to find a better
What have
weapon
we
than
got?
this, but I
Anything
might as
take
well
your
check.
fancy?
Nope.
Till next time.
Please take me back to the hut. Not the beginning of the zone. That's all I ask. Beginning of the zone. Oh well.
I need more time. Steel yourself! Meat creature!
From a CIA handler Slotkin. Even assuming that, like, can anyone make the case from a cui bono perspective that it's in the Democrats' interest after they had just won in the district
What have they
court
done?
level on the National Guard issue for DC for them to like signal intentionally that this National Guard person be shoots? Like, what's the theory there, Rob?
No, I don't
they're
think. I
benefiting from
don't
it?
think. Listen, I don't think that the idea is that they want to signal that the actual shooting occurs. It's the same thing that they wanted to signal, by the way, an action that you basically supported that's not being charged criminally, when they leaked the Dobbs decision and then people were protesting outside Supreme Court justices' houses. Well, you had people like Chuck Schumer saying that people like Kavanaugh had to reap the whirlwind. It's not that they actually wanted someone to commit an act
Was
of
a bad,
violence.
wait, I just want to say pause. It was a bad statement that he apologized for. More than I can say for a lot of Republicans,
But
or like
nonetheless,
Mike
yes,
Lee, or like Mike
What,
Lee. But go
after
ahead.
the assassination attempt, he apologized?
I don't know when exactly he apologized. It might have been no. It's certainly. I suspect it was after. I'm just telling you. I don't
Right.
know, Rob. I suspect it was afterwards. But he did apologize, which is again more than I can say for your side.
The point that I'm trying to get to is, it was never the intent that someone, I would say, it most likely wasn't the intent that someone actually carries out an act of violence. However, it was the intent that their supporters would harass and intimidate in hopes of changing the view. That's why take Schumer out of it. What do you think the intent of the people outside Kavanaugh's house was, other than the assassin?
Yeah, presumably to express one of two things. I think three things.
That'll
Either
be
to
useful.
intentionally cause fear and intrude on their privacy, which I think would be a crime if that was their intent. If their intent was to display to the world that they're politically against this upcoming opinion, or they're intending to change that. And we've talked a little bit about the law with respect to trying to coerce or influence the opinion of a judge. And I think the jury's out on how some of those interact with First Amendment principles.
Yeah, well, I think that it was obvious that they were trying to change the opinion, right? That's what the idea, and that's what the person that leaked it intended. The person that leaked it didn't intend like, oh, I'm just expressing my dislike of this. They leaked it because they intended for people to make their voice heard and hopefully to intimidate, shame, embarrass, whatever you may be, in hopes that this would eventually change the decision.
That's true, but the thing is, the law that you're citing there applies both to, and this, you guys have to understand. So, Rob, there is a statute that purports to make criminal some of this conduct. I'm not denying that, and Rob is correct when he says that there is a statute purporting to do that. By the way, there's also a statute that purports to say, encouraging disloyalty or insubordination from troops is itself like a crime. But you have to understand how these things, just because Congress passed a statute, doesn't mean that it's constitutional. And the same statute that applies to influencing court opinions through protests applies both to like outside homes, but also outside courthouses. And no one seems to deny that there is a legitimate protest justification to be outside the Supreme Court itself to argue or to yell this is a horrible opinion. And so the only difference in terms of the application of law is like, well, it's worse. I don't agree with this protest outside their homes. I disagree. I just want to. I think that it's stupid to do both politically, and I just think that there is a potential for bad shit that occur. And I think
Which happened? An assassination attempt?
Yeah, the guy I think the guy actually did himself.
I mean,
I'm not
that's
remembering the fact,
parsing words.
That's part of the reason why I was against the protests occurring outside their homes. But all I'm saying is there are First Amendment principles to consider here that the law as written applies both to the home and to the outside the courthouse, which everyone seems to accept as well within normal limits.
Nonetheless, by the letter of the law, would you admit this is illegal? You just say that the law itself is not constitutional.
Supreme law of land is a constitution. To the extent that the law conflicts with the Constitution,
Right.
it is not against the law.
Okay, what I'm saying is,
agnostic
by
as
the
to
letter
whether it
of
is.
the law, by the letter of what was written there, it violates that. It may be that law is unconstitutional, though.
Presuming that there were individuals, which I suspect there were, whose intention in the protest was opinion, the letter of that statute says that those kinds of protests directed at changing opinions are unlawful and criminal. The question is, can that be constitutionally applied as to the individuals in public places? Because they were authorized to be where they were. The question is, can it...
That's great. I'm great to get that admission. That by the letter, there are people that violate it. You mentioned the seditious six.
I've always said that.
You mentioned the seditious six, the Mark Kelly stuff. You mentioned the law there that says that, to get people to question or be hesitant of orders. I forget the exact wording of the law. You think that law is unconstitutional as well?
I think as applied, would be unconstitutional. Yeah, it would be unconstitutional. At, like, for example, so I'll give you an example, right? Like one of the seminal cases in the First Amendment jurisprudence, where initially the First Amendment doctrine that was being applied in 10s and 20s. Okay, there were a bunch of people. If you remember Hitchens talks about this. Actually, a famous case, the Schneck decision, where they were trying to encourage people not to sign up to the draft, and they were arrested under the then existing espionage laws for motivating people to not follow the law there, and it was upheld in the Schneck decision. That like advocacy for unruly, for people not to follow with the military, that was illegal, and it was upheld as constitutional apply to them. But we changed all that with Brandenburg, and nowadays, not allowed. Just like I could say something like this, like all the troops need to immediately quit the military and stop what's going on. That is like per se protected under Brandenburg. I mean, that is the very fact pattern that where like the change in the interpretation applies.
When was the statute? What was the statute? I don't have it in front of me.
It's a predecessor statute to some of these. Might be the Espionage Act. It might be some other sedition act.
So that occurred after Brandenburg.
That was
this
before.
law was written. So this law was written before Brandenburg.
What I'm referencing is the Schneck decision that happened during World War I, the recruitment and the after World War I. There was a statute there that made it. Look, it's.
No. I understand. Yeah. I get what you're saying with the Schneck. I'm saying that the statute that people are accusing Mark Kelly and company of violating was that statute written after Brandenburg.
Oh, I have no idea. But whether it is or not, they have to obey Brandenburg.
Okay, so would you argue that based on how that statute is written, that Mark Kelly and etc. have violated? You just
Hell
say
no.
that it violates You don't say that.
So it both would have, if it was their intent to encourage insubordination, which I think it categorically was not. It's not insubordination to obey an unlawful order. You have to prove that their intent was to do that. In the factual sense of intent, you don't meet it. But even if it was their intent, I think it would be protected under Brandenburg. Yeah, that is my opinion.
Someone in the chat said, this is true as well, but Kelly, is he still adhering
that was
to
a talisman.
the UCMJ?
Superior
he's in some
talisman.
sort of status.
Gotta pick that up.
For him, I'm not sure what the precedent would be if Brandenburg applies to currently enlisted people. So I don't know if we've ever confronted that issue, and have to plead ignorance into First Amendment standard as applied. People are
I think
retired or whatever service, but in their capacity, in their like private capacity, it would shock me if people who are part of the military couldn't express their political views on their own time.
I think that based on the statute it's written, I need to get I don't have it in front of me. I wish I did. I forget what the U.S.
I reviewed
code
your
was.
conversation with Ryan. Yeah, you guys brought it up. I'm not doubting that. You guys did bring it up.
But I think that it's clear that most likely, based as it's written, that Kelly and company did do that. The question of whether or not this violates Brandenburg, I would have to plead ignorance on. But what I'm trying to get is, it seems a lot of times, like what you and other people want to do is like, well, technically it violates that statute. I just think that statute's incorrect and unconstitutional. Fine, then charge them and let them fight it in court, whether or not the statute itself is constitutional. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, no,
And if it's not, then so be it. They should be charged based on the law that's written.
I'm not fine with it. I don't think that we should apply clearly unconstitutional laws.
To the carrots.
If we I think it's clearly unconstitutional. So
I don't think you're right. There's a lot of
What does
things.
this do
Like,
to
for
my
example,
damage?
you clearly thought that Trump should have been removed from office under Section 14 or Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, right?
I did think that that's what the law meant, but I never predicted
The Supreme
that
Court
would do it.
disagreed.
Hang on a second.
In a 7-2, right?
I just want to be clear. I never, ever, ever predicted that would be the result, ever. And I think that there were, that he could at least raise arguments to that effect. But here we have an on-point case where, because we've never dealt with that interpretation of Section 3, we do have on-point precedent for Brandenburg. That's the difference.
No, I think, but again, the difference is your interpretation of what's obviously constitutional or not is disagreed by credible people. This aren't people that are fucking just loons. It's not just some people that's a layman like me. They're actually credible people, including Supreme Court justices, that may vehemently disagree with you. So my argument is that this should be charged. It is as written, and then if it's not constitutional, fine.
Well, I guess I don't.
But I don't
understand
see
your
the problem
question.
with charging it.
I guess I don't understand your question. If your question is what I would do, I would not apply something that I found to be clearly unconstitutional. Now, if you don't think it's clearly unconstitutional or you haven't been convinced by that, I can understand maybe why you disagree. But I just think that that's an argument.
Well,
that
what
we
I'm
have.
suggesting is what I'm getting is the admission here that it's it's different with the Kelly situation, but at least with the other
That I'm not
situation,
sure
and I
about,
think there's at least room with the Kelly situation. It's okay, they did violate this possibly,
None will stop
but
me
I
from
just don't
enacting
think that the law is
vengeance.
constitutional. So if it goes to the court that this law is
be careful with that.
constitutional.
So I never had an admission that I think they violated the statute, even if it were constitutional.
No. I said not
Yeah.
with the Kelly situation.
No, and either.
But I think that
I think no one here, they've showed evidence that they want to cause insubordination.
you said, I'm talking about the two cases we're talking about are the statute that talked about the protesting outside of the houses, and you said you do assume someone violated that statute, but think that it's unconstitutional. You assumed. You said that.
I actually don't take that view. I am.
Seemed that you suggested you assumed that someone did that. That's what you said.
No, all right. I have not asserted. I think the law is unconstitutional. I've said that there are serious questions about its constitutionality.
Yeah. Well, then why? Then you should have supported the charging of people.
No, that doesn't either.
If you clearly think that some people fell into that, and you don't 100% know that the law is unconstitutional, then it seems like some sort of charges were warranted. Especially when it led to an assassination attempt of a Supreme Court justice.
You have no idea. You're not going to be able to prove that.
Well, I could prove that the gathering of people outside there laid an atmosphere that someone that was engaged in that also. I don't need to prove. No. Don't misunderstand me. Yes, for a legal standard to prove that's one thing, but what I'm suggesting is if it is a situation where it's up to the discretion whether or not to prosecute, and we can see that it meets the violation of the law based on a technicality, and this situation was severe enough that it was leading to an assassination attempt of Kavanaugh, that would increase the intensity for wanting to. But just like the sandwich thrower, if it happens in a vacuum and it's that's the only attack on ICE that occurred this year, I completely agree. It's I don't think that rises to the level of needing to file charges. But it came in response and in an atmosphere where ICE agents are being attacked over and over again. That's why it's important to make examples of the people that are assaulting them, even in what seems to be benign ways. Same principle. You would agree there's prosecutorial discretion on this, right?
What do you mean prosecutorial discretion on it? Can you? Okay, my bad. When you say there's prosecutorial discretion on it, I guess there's always prosecutorial discretion.
Correct.
I mean, that's another independent reason why I would not be in support of these charges. And you don't even believe this, Rob. I mean, really, would you support, by the letter of the law, all the conservative protesters outside of the Supreme Court any-time some issue is happening would be covered under the statute? But you would never support, as either a prosecutorial discretion matter or as just a policy matter, for you to go after those people who are conservative.
That's true, but there's a difference here. What we're talking about is an escalation of severity in two ways. One, it's not just people outside the court, it's people outside private Supreme Court justices' home, which increases the level of severity. Second, it is something that happened in the environment where there was literally an assassination attempt on one of the justices. Both of those raise the stakes, which would mean that you would be more likely to prosecute that. That's my point.
But hang on a second. If the Rob Noor of the left came and said, hang on a second, don't you think that they're both technically covered there? We have to treat them the same exact way. Isn't that what you always say about all these cases? That we have to treat all technical violations exactly the same, no matter what? And that's what, that was your point about Jan 6, insurrection you just made. Was it's clear you don't care about corrupting, the influencing the judges because you only want to apply it to one group of people. But clearly you recognize that there are cases where intensifiers for severity.
Well, of course there's intensifiers for severity, but it would apply on the individual law, right? For example, with the law on insurrection, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, I think that we haven't applied it for almost anything, and so the implication should be not applying it, right? You seem to suggest that it's something that if someone engages in an insurrection, do you think of a situation, if it met your definition of a sitting U.S. congressman, president, vice president, etc., that engaged in an insurrection, that you wouldn't want to apply Section 3 of the 14th Amendment?
As I sit here, no.
Exactly. That's why I brought up that point to you, because it seems intuitive that would be a bar that people would say, yes, once we accept that this is engagement of an insurrection, we should be serious and not leave anyone hold on.
No, but that is not your point. Your point was not about enforcement priorities. It was about whether I'm a hypocrite for covering one thing or another, and that whether or not I truly care about what you say I care about.
No, it's certainly
Preach,
true.
preacher.
It's certainly true that you're a hypocrite in the ways that you've covered these situations and that you don't really care about like what's going on with the left-wing insurrection. That's true. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is based on your standard of what you said the importance of this was about Trump with January 6th, then you would be a hypocrite if you don't feel that that would be the same with Democrat politicians that have engaged in insurrections now. Right? And you admit, yes, that is true. I would say that if I thought they engaged in insurrection, I can't think of an example that I wouldn't want them removed from office.
As a, yeah, no, it would have to be something weird that I haven't thought about. But in general, if a politician engages in insurrection, I believe the Constitution requires them be disqualified, and that they must be therefore. And so
that's a different burden, right? Than like assault. Where it's like with assault, you wouldn't say, nah, I don't think that everyone that technically meets the violation of the law of assault needs to be charged. You would agree with that.
I totally agree with that, but the point there, and
Exactly
that's also the point on some of these cases where I try to distinguish, to no avail to you, who calls me a Democrat shill on the Hillary Clinton email stuff and all that stuff. When we talk about like what makes sense to charge and what doesn't make sense to charge. Query also, by the way, Lindsey Halligan and the fucking bullshit case against Comey, etc. But we're talking about what I was referencing when I was saying like what I thought was a double standard in you is this notion that I don't really care about insurrections merely because I might think one is worse or versus not, right? We were talking about the use of prosecutorial discretion is formed by things like severity, things like the actual consequences that occur. I'm not saying that those aren't things that you might consider for discretion.
You're mistaken, right? It wasn't even that we were talking about legal consequences when I was talking about your disinterest in insurrections now. We weren't even talking about it in the context of legal application. I was merely saying that you seem to think that insurrections. No. Now you're conflating, saying like this separate point that like about applying Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which we just had a discussion about that. But the bulk of the hypocrisy that I was saying was that yes, you certainly could think that one insurrection is more severe than other, but it seemed that you put importance on the idea of insurrections in the first place. And now when I said that your definition was so broad that clearly both before and after you gave me that definition, Democrats were going to have things or left-wingers were going to have many examples of what would be insurrections. I warned you of this, and then predictably, when we see, as always, Democrats decide to riot, which is tantamount based on your definition of an insurrection, all of a sudden your interest in pointing out insurrection seemed to wane precipitously.
No, I mean, I think that you're just mischaracterizing the nature of my of what I said.
So. I think anyone who's subjective can see that.
All right, I mean, you can think that.
I think.
And by the way, I just want to make a slight point here. I do want to get to the Charlie Kirk point at some point and get your take.
Go ahead, move on wherever you want to take it. It's fine.
For sure. But do you ever get the sense that, like, okay, you can make this too broad criticism. What about the too narrow criticism? Like, for example, let's say something like this. I said something like, a whale is an aquatic animal. And you're like, well, that's too broad, right? But then it's like, okay, let me give you a better definition. A whale is an aquatic animal of this specific genus and species that fits whatever definition is for beluga whale. You would be like, wait, that's not a good definition of whale. And the reason it wouldn't be a quote-unquote good definition of whale is in virtue of how the term whale is used by people. In other words, the meaning of a term is supposed to map onto usage. And especially when we're talking about like a legal definition, we need to appeal to some usage. And so, the criticism that you levy, too broad, to the extent that it means anything really that we ought to take into consideration, wouldn't the too narrow thing apply for you? Like, if it's not including...
No. Absolutely, there could be. I don't think you could say too narrow because I basically haven't taken a stance on what I think the legal definition of insurrection is. In fact, as you know, when I was going to debate you on this, and then I ended up debating Destiny and First, I don't think there is a standard definition of what insurrection is. Let me finish. Let me finish, and I'll explain. Right. What I'm saying is that. Yes, there's absolutely, you could say, Rob, I think the way that you're loosely interpreting insurrection would be far too narrow because I think that there would be things that would rise to the level of insurrection that most objective people would say, yeah, that looks like it rises to the definition, or most legal people would say, yeah, that rises to the level that would be outside of your definition. So absolutely, there is a criticism that you could say that definitions that I'm offering or implying to are too narrow. However, what I'm suggesting is what we should default to is how many times it's been charged since basically the days of the Civil War. And see, it's how we could literally, because if we could point to hundreds of examples of insurrections occurring, literally hundreds, and never once have any of these laws been charged, then it would seem to suggest that no, it doesn't seem a time to start charging them now, just so you can back up the conviction of the President of the United States.
That's the charging decision, and this is kind of like a semantic or language philosophy question, which is separate about what the word "quote unquote" means, right? Like, you would never say that, like, oh, you know, look at all in the past in history, there have been numerous adult human females that were considered women back before they knew anything about gametes and chromosomes or anything like that, and therefore, because of these, you know, we didn't call those people men. We shouldn't call them men now under our current, definitions of male and gender and like male and female, and that I think is missing the point. The question isn't, or I thought the question wasn't, is it useful for this definition to be a particular thing? It's what is the usage of the term? In other words, how can you claim, right, that my definition is too loose or too broad if you don't have a reference, right? You have to have some notion of insurrection before you can say that mine is quote unquote too broad.
You're conflating two things. You're conflating a colloquial use of the word versus a legal use of the word. So it's all right for me to say, I don't think at this point there is a standard legal definition, because since 1864, the last time that like insurrection was declared, there's literally been 0 charges, when based on the definition you're giving, there would literally have been hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of insurrections, and not once was any of them charged. It seems to be then that the way that this has been interpreted is insurrection was something that they were hyper-focused on right after the Civil War, and that was the intent of what was going on. After that, a bunch of things that have met that definition are like, we choose to not charge it as an insurrection. If it rises the level of crimes, there are other things that we can charge, which has been the case every single time up until the accusations of January 6th, right? And it continues to go back to that afterwards when we see the insurrections based on what you say is the definition that that left-wingers are engaged with now. What I think is the colloquial definition is different, and that's sort of what you're explaining by like the definition of what we consider man or woman. Sure, definitions gradually change of words, and we use these words in ways that oftentimes become different and change over time. What's the word we use? Like, I'm fucking half asleep. Entomology or whatever of words.
Yeah,
I understand that,
etymology.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I understand, to go back, not the insect thing, like the word, the history of words, right? Like, yes, I understand that. And so, yes, you could make a claim that my definition of the term insurrection, where I'm basically like a serious attempt to overthrow the government, is too narrow. Like, you could say that, but that's not the argument we're making from a legal perspective. The legal argument's completely different than what my colloquial definition of the term insurrection is.
Okay, but so you're suggesting that, well, because we don't have all these enforcement actions that are numerous in the intervening period, therefore the meaning of insurrection has changed by virtue of the fact that we've seen less prosecutions and cases involving the term insurrection.
Not less, 0.
First of all, I'm not so sure about that. I have done a deep dive. I'm not remembering now the different cases and when the last case of insurrection was. Insurrection is a form of treason, of levying war. So as I sit here, I'm not remembering when the last.
Wait, insurrection is a form of treason, or treason is a form of insurrection?
Insurrection is a form of treason. Treason is the broader category.
So then everyone who commits an insurrection commits treason.
That's correct.
Okay, and so therefore every single person technically engaged in it, and one of the punishments for treason could be death, correct?
That's correct.
So every single person currently that is engaged in insurrections against ICE could legally be put to death.
I think that's possibly true, yes.
So just to be clear, and furthermore, given your definition of insurrection, that would mean that something like this, 2 people decide that they are going to protest marijuana laws and end up shoving a police officer to stop them from arresting someone that's...
No, that was Andrew Wilson. Hang on a second. That was Andrew Wilson's
to Destiny.
Stylized hypothetical, which I think has a bunch of problems in it. But to answer your question, we can just get to the point. Just because I think that there's a maximum punishment that was allowed under the historical definition, when I say that insurrection is a form of treason, I'm not saying that I want it to be this way. It just is, Rob. You chart out the history of the term insurrection. A synonym for it is levying war. Levying war. And if you look at the Constitution for what defines treason, it's giving aid or comfort to enemies and levying war against the United States. So you act, you're like, wait, you're just saying that the punishment could be
then I think that the definition of insurrection you give doesn't meet up to the standard of levying war.
In virtue of what? In virtue of what could you say that? Right? You would have to have some. So I think it's informed by your intuitive notion that it couldn't be the case. Like it just couldn't. It just seems.
How does the court define war?
I don't know that I have.
We would
so,
need to define the term. We would
no.
need a legal definition of the term levy and a legal definition of the term war. Correct?
No, not necessarily. Just because the words, two words. Okay, you act so surprised. This is not a foreign concept to you, because we've had this conversation about territorial jurisdiction for purposes of the habeas corpus
Wait,
statutes.
you're wrong on this.
On what?
The
No, I'm not wrong.
jurisdiction of it. You are. But anyways,
Okay,
proceed.
but just two words combined doesn't necessarily mean that the independent definitions of both create the unified
Okay,
definition.
well then define the concept, the legal concept of levying war. What the
Yes.
legal definition of levying war is.
It's what the test is for insurrection, because they're synonymous. Do you understand?
No, so you're telling me that levying war doesn't mean like. I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't think that you're correct.
Wait, when you say you don't think I'm correct, in virtue of what?
Show me proof that insurrection means is levying war
Sure.
synonymous.
I sent you the Graeber paper. And hang on. I'll even just right now as we sit here, Graeber.
You don't even have to send it. Just tell me what his quote is to suggest that.
Because so I'll give you one example. Okay. So
You are nothing but a
the
tyrant.
have you heard of the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry? This is the
Yes.
white guy who was a
Yeah, I know.
anti-slave person, right?
Yeah.
So they look at these cases of like Harper's Ferry raid, of various attacks on the fugitive slave laws, right? Where they were preventing and frustrating enforcement of the fugitive slave laws. And those are instances in which they charged them with, they refer to what they were doing as insurrection. And I think John Brown was literally charged with conspiracy for insurrection. And the test there, and he was hanged for that in treason, were coextensive. And so if you track the history of what is being talked about when they're talking about insurrection and the different legal definitions they're using, they were used synonymously as a form of treason. Like, hang on, I'm pulling up the paper right now, so it's like. So all I'm doing is trying to provide like an actual rounded out.
I mean, you tell me, I'll grant you that I'm looking at AI, and this could be absolute bullshit, as we know that it's garbage when it comes to legal matters. So I will take your word if you're saying some of the shit's untrue, right? But it says, when I'm talking about Graeber specifically and how they define the term levying war, the courts, it says, mere conspiracy or planning is not enough. This is central holding an ex parte moment. I would say that that intuitively makes sense. There must be an overt act of raising and marching an armed body of men.
Yeah. Wait. So what are you trying to say there?
So it's there needs
to be actual open and avowed situations. It can't be something
says
where,
in-
so you haven't done an insurrection if you've just like planned for it.
No,
that make
yeah,
sense?
I agree. But raising and marching an armed body of men.
Yeah. So those aren't the technical elements of insurrection. Just because they.
But not insurrection. We're talking about the term levying war.
Okay. So, but the question is whether or not levying war is the same thing as insurrection. And to do that, you don't just look at the elements thereof. You look at whether there's an equality being made in the various different treatises and cases between them. And so this is what Graeber cites here.
God damn it.
Americans,
Okay.
From his paper. Americans in the 19th century regarded, quote, insurrection as a synonym for, quote, levying
that mean
war,
I lose my
proviso,
drops?
As Chief Justice John Marshall noted in United States versus Burr, that, quote, levying war was a technical term. Levying war in the constitutional sense did not require, as Trump's lawyer suggested, massive armies, a violent national conflict, or a declaration of war. Persons levied war against the United States when they sought to overthrow the government of the United States, resisted by force federal authority, or resisted by force the implementation of any federal law. Levying war.
So I
was
don't
often
get
a
any
local
drops
affair.
there?
An insurrection could be limited to a neighborhood or county as long as persons were resisting by force or violence the implementation of federal law. Adjudicating a case arising from the whiskey insurrection,
That's
Justice
annoying.
Patterson in U.S. v. Mitchell declared, quote, an insurrection with an avowed design to suppress public offices is an act of levying war.
Stupid.
Okay,
US v.
Fucking
Mitchell,
bullshit.
USC 348.
This proceeds to say like levying war. Marshall's opinion allowed to a specific narrow adoption and technical historically rooted definition of levying war that was deliberately designed to make treason convictions almost impossible in cases of domestic insurrection that lack clear foreign involvement or monarchical intent. It says one of those is an overt raising and marching of armed men. I would think that you could have an insurrection based on your definition without an overt marching of armed men. In addition, it gives examples of things that weren't constituting levying war. You tell me if these are incorrect. I'm willing to hear it. All right. It says.
Where's this from?
Resistance. This is just literally an AI thing I'm reading. Right. It says resistance to a single marshal or tax collector, even violence resistance, was treated as a riot and not treason. Is that true?
Wait, hang on. That's not true. One of the very famous cases of insurrection, the whiskey insurrection, was Americans gathering like around the tax collector's home and like not even using force, just like threatening force against that person for the purpose of frustrating the enforcement of the federal tax. So that's an example.
But I don't know if that was just against one tax collector, was it?
So there were multiple. So yes, that one act was an act of insurrection. There happened to be other things as well.
Different
but
than
that by the way, that by itself would be considered insurrection under the test. And these people, I mean, it's one of the most famous cases of insurrection. There was a pre-Civil War understanding for what insurrection meant. The Civil War didn't invent the concept of insurrection. But this is the kind of analysis that I'm encouraging, Rob, because if you see the different cases where, yes, it's true, there are less cases as in the 20th century, etc. Maybe even there are little, maybe even none. We're taught as like originalist interpretation that we're supposed to apply the public meaning of the term at the time it's enacted. That's what I've been told by all these conservative jurists. And so I think it's important to go through it.
Let me be clear. Another example is Fry's Rebellion, 1799.
Yes. Exactly.
Was that levying war?
Yes.
It was treason?
Yes.
This says that Marshall and other courts and commentators revoked the treason and said that Marshall treated it as clearly non-treason under the strict definition.
So there were statements on Fry's Rebellion that, so I think Adams spoke out about it, that for whatever reason they either pardoned him or whatever, but that is and Graeber talks about the Fry's Rebellion, they have a back and forth on it, that it was definitely legally considered treason at the time, and it's synonymous with insurrection. We can talk about that.
I'm just saying that, I'm not saying, by the way,
on.
I'm reading a bullshit summary, so
this
I'm
was
not
supposed
saying
to
that this is
generate
correct.
rage.
I'm just saying, is it true that, I'm asking you, is it true that Marshall later commented on this and said this
Probably has to
clearly
hit
wasn't
somebody.
treason?
I'm not remembering Marshall's opinion on Fry's Rebellion. I'm real effing for Marshall here, so I'm just being honest with you. But
dude, I'm not claiming that I fucking understand, like, know this. I'm reading this shit in real time.
So here, I searched Fry's Rebellion. Okay, judges and treatise writers discussing insurrection against fugitive slave laws and considering treason during the Civil War relied on case law developed in the cases involving participants in the whiskey insurrection and the Fry's insurrection. Justices sometimes elaborate on such decisions, such as United States v. Mitchell and case of Fries. Nevertheless, justices on the J., Ellsworth, and Marshall courts would have recognized and endorsed the constitutional law of treason and insurrection as articulated by justices on the Taney and Chase courts, as well as their lower federal court and state court contemporaries. So let me find the analysis on the Fries Rebellion.
This is so here's a quote from John Marshall. This claims from the United States versus Burr in 1807. Marshall says, quote, "The court has been informed from the bench that the case of Fries was not considered, even by those that decided it, a case of constructive levying of war, but as an actual levying of war, and that the opinion of the judges, I'm just reading, and that the assemblage was for the purpose of resisting laws generally, and not merely for the purpose of resisting a particular tax law that was the object of the insurrection. Yet it is perfectly clear that the insurrection was not general, it was local. It was confined to a few townships and a few counties, and it did not extend beyond the limits of Pennsylvania. Even there it was partial. The opinion that this was a levying war has been very much questioned, and it is in fact well worthy of observation that no prosecution for treason has been instituted since that time, although there have been insurrections which, if the principle be correct, would have justified such prosecution."
So, like, that by itself states that Marshall's opinion is that the Fries insurrection was in fact an insurrection of a local kind, right? Not of this broad conflict, but of a local kind. And
correct, and it says that that they, people said that it didn't raise the level of levying war or treason, and in fact there haven't been any prosecution as such in similar situations. It proceeds.
You should send me the source. Like, I don't want to debate against AI right now. I understand what you're saying.
Oh no, it's just it's a quote from United States versus Burr in 1807.
What's the quote say?
August 1807. The court. It starts with this: the court has been informed from the bench that the case of Fries was not considered, even by those who decided a case of constructive levying of war with an actual, but it's an actual levy.
Pause.
That's
Pause. So constructive levying of war is like a legal fiction of levying war. And so when he says it's not a constructive levying of war, it's actual levying of war. That's him saying it is in fact levying of war. And of course, levying of war, this is called the Freeze insurrection, right? Understand? It's like a German guy or something. That's his last
But what
name,
he's saying is, it's perfectly clear that the insurrection was not general. It was local. It was confined to a
Wait,
few
that's him.
townships.
That's proving my point. That's him conflating.
But listen,
and
I want to
saying
be clear. The
insurrection and
argument that we're
levying
having
war are the
here
same
isn't the
thing.
definition of insurrection. It's arguing if it's synonymous with levying
Levying?
war.
No, but no,
He
that quote
continues,
proves it.
the opinion was that this was a levying of war has been very much questioned, he says, and it is in fact well worthy of observation that no prosecution for treason has been instituted since that time, although there have been insurrection which, if the principle be correct, would have justified such prosecutions. In other words, he's saying, if this was in fact treason, we have seen that there are other cases that would have met this bar, and it's worth noting that none of them have been charged as treason.
I'm not seeing
in
that
other words,
quote.
been charged as...
You should send it to me. I will definitely respond. But at least you can acknowledge there that what they're citing is that the case, that the case is synonymizing levying
If you
war
go
with
to the,
insurrection.
if you go to the private chat, I'll put it in there. It's bullshit.
court has
One
been informed.
paragraph.
I've been informed.
And then again, it says other things I'm reading here, and this speaks to Graeber. And again, you've read Graeber, and presumably you know more. But it says Graeber's larger argument is that this cramped definition was politically deliberate. Federalists and Republicans alike wanted to prevent the treason clause from being used against domestic political opponents. Both parties feared that the broad definition would allow whichever party controlled the federal government to brand its armed political enemies as traitors. So Marshall and the courts essentially read levying war to require something very close to a real civil war or foreign-backed invasion before the treason clause could be triggered. In short, Graeber summarizes the early court's definition of levying war as, quote, an actual military assemblage of armed men gathered for a public object of resisting or overthrowing the laws or authority of the United States by force on a scale large enough to resemble war, not mere riot or private violence. Is that true?
I have no idea. How could I possibly respond to that particular quote?
Well, I mean,
generated
no,
by
no,
an
no, no,
AI.
no, no,
I don't
no.
know what you're talking. Like,
No,
so I'm
no, no,
trying to
no,
look for
no.
the quotes. I just
No,
control F.
no.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, as someone who's read Graeber and
Yeah.
understands his interpretation, does that?
Of
I'm
what?
not saying, do you think that that quote word for word is true? Does that ring true of what he's suggesting?
That Republicans were trying to limit and cabin the
No,
meaning
the
of
specific quote that he cite there, that Graeber defines levying war as, quote, an actual military assemblage of armed men gathered for a public object of resisting or overthrowing the laws or authority of the United States by force on a scale large enough to resemble war, not mere riot or private violence.
So, no, because that definition isn't the one he gives for insurrection, and he treats them as synonymous. So, levying war. Let's see. Like it's
Here's my first crash.
Graeber's point that levying war is insurrection, and so to the extent that levying war is not encompassed by his definition of insurrection, then it wouldn't be clear. Constitutional authorities in the United States during the Civil War emphasized that levying war prong of the treason clause in the federal statutes punishing treason. The indictments against Jefferson Davis for treason spoke of levying war. Rather than adhering to their enemies, because relying on the latter might have implied the lawfulness of secession, right? Because then it implies that, like, it's a foreign government. They didn't want to do that. This is Justice Stephen Field, when charging the jury in U.S. versus Greathouse, explained why Confederates, because they considered Confederates traitors, right?
Fight to the last.
The Confederates were traitors. Why were they traitors? Because they committed treason. How did they commit treason? By levying war. And that is how they did insurrection. And so this is Justice Stephen Field in U.S. versus Greathouse. He stated the second clause applies only to the subjects of foreign powers in a state of open hostility. It does not embrace rebels and insurrection against their own government. An enemy is always the subject of a foreign power who owes no allegiance to our government or country. And so that's him saying you have to rely on levying war, not giving aid or comfort to the enemies. And so that is them acknowledging, right? These traitors, who engaged in the Civil War insurrection, committed treason by levying war. And that is why treason is the bigger category. Underneath it is levying war.
I will say this. I will say this.
My potion is a piece of shit.
I'm willing to accept that this AI could absolutely be 100% bullshit, and I've seen it make up quotes. So by no means will I interpret that Graeber actually said that. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying it would be interesting because what you're reading there isn't necessarily a specific definition that he's giving of levying war. He's sort of talking about it in a context that's in other things. I'll grant you that, but I don't know that it goes as far as specifically defining that term as to more say that there was actual things that coincide with the insurrection. I don't know that it goes to the point where it says that those actual things are synonymous. The other thing I'm just reading this now. This may actually prove your point. I don't know. I could bring it up on screen. This is from Justia. Is that how you pronounce this shit? You know what that is,
Yeah,
right?
Justia, yeah.
Yeah. So here's what it says on levying war. We'll just read. It may prove your point. I haven't read it. Section 3, Clause 1 of treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses the same overt act. Annotations. Early judicial interpretation of the meaning of treason in terms of levying war was conditioned by the partisan struggles of the early 19th century, which involved the treason trials of Aaron Burr and his associates, and Ex parte Bowman, which involved 2 of Burr's Confederates. Chief Justice Marshall, speaking for himself and 3 other justices, confined the meaning of levying war to the actual waging of war. Quote, however flagitious may be the crime of conspiring to subvert the force of government of our country, such conspiracy is not treason. To conspire to levy war and actually to levy war are distinct offenses.
The distinction is conspiracy there and levying war.
Yes, totally agree. That's what he's saying at this point. Absolutely, don't disagree. The first must be brought into open action by the assemblage of men for the purpose of treasonable in itself, or the fact of levying war cannot have been committed. So far as this principle has been carried, that it has been determined that the actual enlistment of men to serve against the government does not amount to the levying of war. Marshall was careful, however, to state that the court did not mean that no person could be guilty of this crime who had not appeared in arms.
Correct.
On the contrary, it makes sense. On the contrary, if the war actually be levied, that is, if the body of men who had actually assembled for the purpose of effecting by force a treasonable purpose, all of those who perform any part, however minute or however remote from the scene or the action, were actually leagued in general conspiracy or to be considered traitors. But there must be an actual assemblage of men for the treasonable purpose. On the basis of these considerations, and because no part of the crime charge has been committed in the District of Columbia, the court held that Bowman and Swart could not be tried in the district and ordered their discharge. Marshall continued by saying that the crime of treason should not be extended by construction to doubtful cases, and concluded that no conspiracy for overturning the government and no enlisting of men to effect it would be an actual levying of war. Not long after.
So understand what's going on there in audience as well. So what they're saying is, we don't want to be willy-nilly applying treason to anyone who just is like talking about and conspiring to overthrow the government. That this label is only when they actually do it. And now you can engage in it and you can be part of a levying war even if you're remote and you're not actually the people holding arms once there actually is a levying of war / insurrection / treason. But that you need to have an actual actus reus, an actual thing occurring. But this doesn't help us in terms of
the rest of this isn't going to help either. I've read, and the Burr trial just basically makes the same point. That's like the reason Burr got off the hook was that he wasn't specifically there at the time, which meant that just the conspiring of it wouldn't be the act of levy.
Oh my god. Why do we always go down this road?
I think his computer just went down.
Oh,
Just
shit.
Give me a second. We are currently making getting him a new computer. Oh,
Button and exited my own damn stream. It's all right. So yeah,
No, this is all really interesting. And I encourage we should talk more about this. But you should really just like read the Graeber paper. It's really convincing, man. And I promise you, I was resistant to this Section 3 argument when Josiah first presented it to me. But they're really, if you took it a historical
crashing a
lens,
lot
now you
now.
could come out and say, Rob,
People
I
getting
don't
off
think
work,
we should
maybe?
apply the historical test for whatever reason. But if you look at the cases that were actually applied historically, it's nothing approaching the kind of restrictive definition that you're seeming to think is adequate.
but
and
the point that I'm making, and even if that Marshall quote is true, which I don't know that it is, but it sounds like it's probably true, right? Is that he's saying like, look, we're very. Like, if this is literally treason, there's been many cases where this would have applied, and yet it's never been charged in those cases.
I don't know what,
Seems to be, and that's Marshall. I mean, fuck, Marshall's writing in when? Like 18 fucking.
early 1800s.
Yeah, so like the idea, right? The idea that we've seen since then, hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of times, the insurrections would have been done, and never once have they even been charged as an insurrection, let alone as treason. Seems to be.
This is what Marshall says in Case of Fries. This is from the Graeber paper. Chase in Case of Fries declared. That's Chase. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Marshall maintained it is altogether immaterial whether the force used to be sufficient to effectuate the object. This is Marshall, right? any force connected with the intention will constitute the crime of levying of war. And so that is him saying, just because it's a futile insurrection, that it won't be able to effectuate its purpose in overturning the law or overcoming the government
Ooh,
or
looks
whatever,
like it might
that doesn't
be
make it not
fucked.
levying war. Just because there's one person, sorry, not one person, 100 people or 1,000 or more than that, that it doesn't change whether or not it's an insurrection. That's martial. I can try to look for the quotes. You should send them to me.
Yeah. I put the quote in the private, so you could.
I googled
just copy and
the
paste.
start of it and I didn't see jack shit.
Okay,
The court has
it
been informed
might
from the bench.
actually be bullshit.
Be careful with the AI stuff. But
Yeah, I know. I'm fully admitting that.
All right. Well, I'll come